Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the First Battle of the Marne, known to the French as the Miracle of the Marne. This battle took place in September of 1914 between roughly 1.1 million British and French forces against 900,000 German forces. This battle was a major turning point in World War I, and one of the big reasons why the war did not end as quickly as many had hoped for. What you see in front of you right now, this is a map showing where the soldiers were lined up for this particular battle. You'll notice that the German forces are in red and the British and French forces are in blue. Now, the commanders of the British and French forces were Joseph Joffre, who can be seen there on the left, and John French commanded the British forces there on the right. And I know that can be confusing that the commander of the British forces was French in his name, not his nationality. Now, Joseph Joffre, again, pictured on the left there, his reputation was actually suffering quite a bit by September of 1914, due in large part to two factors. The first factor is the disastrous French losses at the Battle of the Frontiers. The Battle of the Frontiers was one of the first major engagements of World War I. The second reason that his reputation took a hit is due to the disastrous losses by the French at the Battle of Mons, also one of the big battles early on in the war. And because of his failure to get any type of victory for the French forces, he was seen as perhaps not the best person to be commanding the forces at that point. In fact, after the disastrous Battle of the Mons, John French, again pictured there on the right, was making plans to evacuate the entirety of the British expeditionary force across the English Channel back to Britain in order to save them for later in the war. Now, after the Battle of the Frontiers and the Battle of Mons, the British and French forces embarked on what was known as the Great Retreat. The Great Retreat was a multi-day long, about a 250-mile fighting retreat from the lines where Mons and the Battle of the Frontiers had been fought. What this meant was that the British and French forces were utterly exhausted. Some of them had been marching for up to 2 weeks by the time the Battle of the Marne began. The Battle of the Marne was essentially a kind of last-ditch Hail Mary effort on the part of the French to prevent the Germans from completely encircling Paris and ending the First World War much the same way as they ended the Franco-Prussian War about 40 to 50 years earlier. So one of the big reasons why this is known as the Miracle of the Marne to the French is, again, the French forces were basically dead on their feet. And they were utterly exhausted, they were starving, they were dehydrated, and many of them were simply falling apart due to exhaustion. Now, at the Battle of the Marne, the French forces decided to make their stand at the Marne River. Again, this was Joseph Joffre's attempt, and this was in coordination with the mayor of Paris, to attempt to stop this German advance. Casualty numbers were already horrifically high from the Battle of the Frontiers and the Battle of Mons. In fact, in one day of fighting in the Battle of the Frontiers, the French lost 27,000 soldiers. And again, if we're looking at that in perspective of Lee High School, for example, that's 9 times the enrollment of Lee High School lost in a single day. That's at the Battle of the Frontiers. So the French forces were already suffering horrifically at this point. But again, Joseph Joffre knew that he had to do something in order to stop the Germans. One of the more interesting aspects of the Battle of the Marnes was the use of the French taxis. Now, the military governor in Paris actually requisitioned 10,000 of Paris's taxis in order to shuttle soldiers to the front lines. Fun fact, of those 10,000 requisitioned taxis, 7,000 were unavailable because their drivers were already fighting at the Battle of the Marne. So what wound up happening is these taxis in the middle of the night were shuttling 5,000 soldiers to the front lines to reinforce positions that were being weakened. The taxi drivers didn't know exactly what it was they were doing when they were requisitioned in the middle of the night, and they were instructed not to turn their headlights on, but simply to follow the tail lights of the taxi in front of them. The taxi drivers all kept their meters running, and the city of Paris would have to reimburse the drivers for roughly 70,000 francs at the battle's conclusion. The taxi drivers were also not very happy to be participating in this. Now, a lot of the credit for the victory of the British and French forces during the Battle of the Marne was actually given to the taxi cabs. But here's the thing. 5,000 additional soldiers in a time when losses were tens of thousands in a single day wasn't going to make that huge of a difference. Perhaps the biggest contributing factor to the British and French victory was the mistake of this man, Alexander von Kluck. Alexander von Kluck was the German commander of the First German Army. And what he decided to do was, when he had the French soldiers on the ropes and they started retreating on the left flank, which would have been the German right flank, the French and British left flank, von Kluck ignored Helmut von Moltke's orders and instead decided to pursue the French forces. He thought that they were in a full rout and that they were broken and that he could effectively roll up the French flank at that point. However, this pursuing of the retreating French forces led to a gap forming between Helmut von Moltke's First German Army and the Second German Army. Due to aerial reconnaissance, and again, this is one of the first battles in which airplanes are used to scout out the battlefield, Joseph Joffre was immediately aware of this hole that had now opened between the First and Second Armies on the battlefield. So what Joffre did is he got together all of the soldiers that he possibly could, and he effectively tried to form a wedge to go straight into this hole. Now, this wedge was pretty impactful. It caused the Germans to begin falling back, but it didn't break the German forces. And in fact, Joseph Joffre had to go to Joseph French. And Joffre, by the way, was a very stoic individual, didn't show his emotions very often. But he actually starts crying in front of John French, begging French to give him British forces to exploit this opening. And John French had a pretty poor relationship with Joseph Joffre. He was pretty petulant and standoffish, but he actually agreed to grant Joffre the forces that he needed. And in doing so, they were able to basically form this huge gap in the German lines and start rolling up the German flanks. German attacks began to taper off, and by mid-September, the Germans were now in a retreat. Helmut von Moltke, who was the overall commander of the German forces at this point, reported to the Kaiser, "The war is lost." And he actually had a bit of a nervous breakdown at this point due to the Germans not being able to deliver a knockout punch at the Battle of the Marne. Helmut von Moltke was pretty much incapacitated by stress and anxiety at this point, and the commander serving under him had to order a general German retreat where they pulled back to the Aisne, where they would wind up reinforcing. Helmut von Moltke would later be replaced with Erich von Falkenhayn. And von Falkenhayn is going to wind up being the German commander through large portions of the war, certainly through the Battle of Verdun, where Falkenhayn will try to create what he called a meat grinder. So at the end of the Battle of the Marne, the casualty numbers were roughly 500,000 dead or wounded. And keep in mind that this battle is taking place over only a couple of days, and we're talking 500,000 dead or wounded. These are staggering numbers at this point in the war. What this battle did is it prevented the war from ending early, and it would begin the race to the sea, where the British and French forces would try to get around the German forces who had retreated. In turn, the German forces would then retreat around the British and French forces. And what this would do is, as both groups reinforced their positions, would lead to a line of trenches that extended all the way from the Alps in the south to the North Sea at the north, which would then lead us into the part of World War I that we all know, which is this era of trench warfare. So I hope that was useful to you all in understanding the Battle of the Marne and why the Battle of the Marne was very important to the French and why it was referred to as a miracle to them. I'm going to be giving you a few more video updates in the coming days. I hope to do one on the Battle of Verdun next. And then after we transition on to parts 3 and 4 of the World War I PowerPoints, I'll give you some more information on Gallipoli and the home front, what's going on there. Also note that I did wind up ordering a better webcam and microphone, so expect the video quality to improve if this weird situation that we have extends beyond the initial 2 weeks. All right, guys, I will talk to you later. Have a good day.